She had everything taken from her, yet someone was hunting her for a secret she barely understood. Then he appeared, a cowboy with eyes that promised safety or danger. Could she trust him, or would following him be her last mistake? Stay just one more minute, and I'll take you into the storm, reveal the choices that could save or ruin them both, and uncover the secret no one dared speak of. Before we continue, share in the comments how you'd feel if you had to trust someone you didn't know and where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story of courage, hope, and heart, and may your day be filled with warmth and inspiration. The sky over Montana stretched in heavy swaths of gray, the kind that pressed down on the high plains and muffled every sound. Snow drifted in lazy swirls, coating the rooftops of Cedar Ridge in silent white. Smoke curled from chimneys in slow spirals, carrying the scent of baked bread and wood smoke, a fragile warmth against the biting wind. The town itself seemed to hold its breath, a small collection of weathered buildings hunkered against the winter, as if bracing for a storm that had long passed. The crunch of distant hoofbeats echoed faintly, mingling with the sharp whistle of wind through the eaves. Cedar Ridge was quiet, almost too quiet, but alive in its own frozen way. A figure appeared along the main street, tall and deliberate, moving through the snow like a man carved from the land itself. Ethan Calloway, 36, high-cheekboned, with storm-gray eyes shadowed by the brim of a worn hat, pulled his coat tighter around his frame. His flannel jacket was thick with age, sleeves rolled to the elbows, frayed cuffs dusted with snow. Jeans stained with mud and ice clung to legs honed by decades of solitude. Ethan's presence was at once commanding and solitary, a man who had spent more nights in the wilderness than in conversation. Behind him, a chestnut horse, tall and solid, followed with measured steps, nostrils flaring against the cold. A medium-sized hunting dog trailed beside them, black and brown coat bristling, ears alert, eyes sharp as it scanned every shadow. Together the four moved through the town like an echo of the high plains, each step punctuating the quiet. Ahead, the warm glow of the bakery spilled out onto the snow-covered street. Through the faint haze of steam, Ethan noticed a figure huddled near the door. A young woman, barely 22, crouched low, hands trembling as she scooped up crumbs from the frozen ground. Her coat was threadbare, edges frayed, and her hair, brown and unkempt, spilled across her pale face in frozen tangles. Bare feet peeked from beneath her skirt, red and raw from the snow. Clara Winthrop's eyes darted constantly, wary, haunted, not just by the cold, but by something far heavier, a weight no coat could shield her from. The murmurs of the townsfolk carried across the street before Ethan could approach. "That's her. The runaway bride," one whispered, "stole from her own family, left a fortune behind." The words carried venom and curiosity, settling on Clara like a snowstorm. Her eyes flicked up, meeting Ethan's, and in that instant, suspicion and relief wrestled in equal measure. Ethan stepped closer, boots sinking into the snow. "Cold?" he asked, voice low but firm, carrying a warmth that seemed foreign in the frozen air. Clara flinched but did not flee. Instead, she clutched at the crumbs in her hands, her lips parting as if to speak, yet no sound came. Without a word, Ethan moved to the bakery door and handed over coins. A small stack of fresh bread appeared in Clara's hands moments later. The gesture was simple, yet it struck her like a lifeline. She stared at him, eyes wide, unsure if trust could exist in a town that had branded her a thief. Ethan's gaze held steady, unyielding, yet not unkind. He did not ask for explanations. He did not judge. He merely stood, a silent anchor amidst the whispers and the wind. From the shadows, a small figure watched. Sammy Hodge, 10, tousled blonde hair poking from a frayed wool cap, leaned against a fence post, eyes wide. His patched shirt and threadbare trousers offered little protection from the cold, yet he remained still, captivated by the scene. Sammy had always been curious about the world, about people, about courage, and what he saw now, this quiet act of protection, stirred something deep inside him. He clenched his fists in wonder, imagining a world where one could stand up for someone, no matter the consequences. Clara's hands trembled as she held the bread. For weeks she had moved through streets and alleyways, invisible, surviving on scraps and cold, and now, for the first time, she felt a fragile thread of hope. The warmth from the bread, the steadiness in Ethan's eyes, and the low whine of the dog beside him began to thaw a part of her she had thought frozen forever. A sudden gurgle of hoofbeats cut through the quiet. Clara's head snapped up. Through the swirling snow, a shadow moved along the narrow street, fleeting, almost intangible, then vanished. Her heart hammered in her chest. Only Ethan and his dog remained, the horse stamping lightly, alert and cautious. The threat was unseen, yet the tension in the air tightened. In that heartbeat, the danger felt immediate. The world around her had not yet softened. And yet here, in the center of it, was a man willing to protect her. Clara's breath clouded before her, small and uneven, as she took a cautious step forward. Trust was foreign, but survival demanded choices. She swallowed, the bread still warm in her hands, and met Ethan's eyes. There was no promise of safety beyond what he offered in that moment, just the silent assurance that she would not face the storm alone. Behind a corner, Sammy shifted his weight, the cold biting, but he did not look away. The lesson was already settling in. Courage could be quiet. It could be steady. It could exist in the space between fear and action. He would remember this moment, the first glimpse of bravery not born of recklessness, but of compassion. Snowflakes drifted down, larger now, melting in the warmth of the bakery light, dusting Ethan's coat and the horse's mane. The town remained hushed, yet the air was charged with possibility. Clara's pulse slowed fractionally, but a low, instinctive tension lingered. Someone, or something, watched from the periphery, their intentions hidden in shadow. The threat was real, immediate, and yet, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Clara had a choice. The crunch of snow behind her made her turn sharply. A fleeting figure moved between buildings, a silhouette almost swallowed by the swirling whiteness, and then it was gone. The sense of being observed prickled her skin. Ethan shifted slightly, hand brushing the reins of his horse, alert but calm, ready for whatever might emerge from the blizzard. The dog growled softly, tail stiff, ears forward. The world around them was dangerous, cold, and unyielding, but here a fragile alliance had formed. Clara clutched the bread, her fingers warming against it, and for the first time let herself feel a small measure of relief. She would not face this night alone, not entirely, and though the shadow remained in her peripheral vision, a question loomed. Could trust be enough to survive the storm and the dangers that followed? The wind howled, snow whipped around the edges of the street, and Cedar Ridge seemed to hold its breath once more. In the silence, Clara realized she had a choice to make, one that could change everything. And somewhere in that moment, a story of courage, trust, and fragile hope began to take root. Night had fallen over Cedar Ridge, and the wind carried a sharper bite than the fading light had promised. Snow swirled in drifts, wrapping the streets and alleyways in a suffocating hush. Clara Winthrop huddled against the brick wall behind the small tavern, the scent of stale ale and charred wood curling faintly through the cold. Her coat, patched and damp from the afternoon's wandering, did little to stave off the chill that gnawed at her bones. Hands wrapped around her knees, she tried to make herself smaller, invisible. Each gust of wind rattled the shutters and rattled her heart with it. For hours, Clara had waited in that narrow alley, her mind circling the same question. Could she trust anyone at all? The townsfolk's rumors still lingered in her ears like icy needles, accusations of theft, of a runaway bride, of someone not fit to walk these streets. She had learned, the hard way, that a person alone was as fragile as a snowflake in a blizzard. The distant clip-clop of hooves interrupted her thoughts. Clara's head snapped up. Moonlight caught a flash of movement along the alley entrance. Her pulse spiked, a familiar spike of fear rising through her chest. Then Ethan appeared, moving cautiously, his broad shoulders hunched against the wind, a heavy wool blanket slung over one arm, a knife secured in his belt. The chestnut horse followed, stamping once in the snow, ears forward, nostrils flaring against the cold. Behind them, the dog padded softly, alert to every shadow. Clara froze, unsure whether to run or stay. Ethan's storm-gray eyes met hers from across the alley. In that brief, silent exchange, the man conveyed both protection and patience. No questions, no judgments, just a steady presence against the chaos of the night. He dropped the blanket at her feet. "It's colder than it looks," he said, voice low, calm. "Wrap yourself. Move if you need to." Clara hesitated, then slowly bent to gather the wool. It smelled faintly of horses and smoke, a strange comfort. She wrapped it around her shoulders, her trembling hands betraying the weeks of fear and cold she had endured. For a moment, she felt a fragile thread of safety. The tears that had been kept at bay for so long pricked at her eyes. And then, just as quickly, they spilled over, quiet, hesitant, a surrender she hadn't allowed herself in weeks. Ethan said nothing. He simply knelt a few paces away, his presence a protective wall, letting her grief unfold without intrusion. Clara's sobs subsided gradually, leaving her breath shallow, chest heaving. In the shadows, the faint outline of the tavern's roof seemed less menacing. Here, at last, was a place where someone cared. From a darkened corner, a small figure watched. Sammy Hodge, 10 years old, blonde hair peeking from a threadbare wool cap, leaned against a wooden post. His blue eyes shone with curiosity and cautious admiration. He had been following Clara's movements earlier, drawn by both concern and a budding sense of responsibility he barely understood. Watching Ethan's quiet care for the trembling girl, Sammy felt a stir of something new, an awareness that helping others was not just possible, but necessary. His small hands clenched the edge of the post, knuckles white against the cold. The wind whipped harder, rattling trash and loose boards along the alley walls. Shadows stretched and twisted in the flickering lamplight, morphing into vague shapes that played tricks on the mind. Clara hugged the blanket closer, trying to keep herself tethered to reality. And then, movement, a faint shuffle, a subtle shift in the snow outside the alley pulled her gaze to the darkness beyond. Someone was there, watching, waiting. Her breath caught. The instinct to run flared, raw and urgent. But she remained, rooted by Ethan's steady gaze and the protective stance of his horse and dog. The alley was narrow. Escape would be messy, dangerous. She had nowhere to go, and now, for the first time, someone else's vigilance gave her a sliver of courage. Ethan shifted slightly, hand brushing the knife at his belt, signaling readiness. His eyes swept the perimeter, scanning for threats, alert yet calm. Clara's fear didn't vanish, but the edges softened. She could feel a subtle connection forming, a bond of trust, of shared survival. Her mind drifted briefly to the bread he had given her yesterday, the simple gesture that had cracked open the shell around her heart. This was no longer just sustenance. It was proof that kindness could exist even in the harshest of winters. Hours seemed to stretch unnaturally. The wind moaned through the alley, carrying scraps of sound from the distant streets. Each noise set Clara's nerves on edge, the clatter of a tin can, the faint echo of a footstep, the restless stamp of the horse. But through it all, Ethan remained steadfast, a solid presence against the unpredictable night. He did not speak, yet every movement conveyed purpose. Protect, watch, endure. Sammy shifted slightly, trying not to be seen. The boy's small frame shivered in the cold, yet his eyes never left the scene. He absorbed everything, the caution, the patience, the quiet courage. Here, in this alley, he was learning more about bravery than he ever could in a classroom or at home, and for a fleeting moment, the fear in his chest mingled with a budding hope. Clara dared a glance toward the alley entrance again. A faint shadow seemed to move at the edge of her vision, then vanish as if swallowed by the night. Her heart raced. Ethan's eyes caught hers, and in that instant she understood something vital. The threat might be real, but she was no longer entirely alone. The minutes passed like hours. Snow continued to fall, coating the alley in soft, white silence. Ethan finally spoke, low and steady. "Oh, you're safe here for now. Don't make a sound, and don't move until it's gone." Clara nodded, barely trusting her voice to emerge. She wrapped the blanket tighter, shoulders hunched, feeling the warmth seep into her frozen limbs. The night deepened, and a distant howl carried across the rooftops, mingling with the whistle of the wind. It was a reminder that danger still roamed, unseen and unrelenting. Yet inside the alley, a fragile sanctuary existed. For Clara, it was the first time in weeks she had felt even a flicker of safety, a possibility that the world was not entirely cruel. And still, the threat lingered unseen, but palpable. Clara's eyes kept flicking toward the alley entrance, her fingers clutching the blanket, heart pounding. She knew the night was far from over. The shadow remained, just beyond perception, a reminder that trust was fragile and survival uncertain. A dark figure lingered at the far end of the alley, obscured by drifting snow. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she realized someone was watching, yet she could not see who. Ethan's hand rested on the knife at his belt, prepared for whatever might emerge. The night held its silence, waiting for the first move. Clara had a choice: stay hidden and hope, or risk revealing herself. The first pale light of dawn seeped through the low-hanging clouds, brushing the snow with a cold, silvery glow. Cedar Ridge still lay silent under its winter blanket, the alleys empty, streets crisp with fresh frost. Clara Winthrop tightened the wool blanket around her shoulders, shivering despite the warmth. The night had been merciless, but now, with a faint glow on the horizon, a new challenge waited. Trust had begun to root itself between her and Ethan, but uncertainty still clung like frost to the edges of her thoughts. Ethan Calloway emerged from the shadows, leading his chestnut horse by the reins. He moved with deliberate, silent steps, eyes scanning every angle. His face, worn and tanned, bore the marks of countless winters on the plain's furrowed brows, storm-gray eyes, jaw set in quiet determination. The knife at his belt glinted faintly in the dim morning light, a reminder of the dangers that roamed the wilderness beyond town. He offered Clara a hand. "We should leave before the sun climbs higher. The homestead's not far, and you'll be safer there." Clara hesitated. Her hands, still trembling from the night, gripped the blanket tightly. I can't," she whispered. "They'll find me. If they see me leaving—" Her words broke off, caught between fear and self-preservation. She thought of the rumors, the bounty that had been placed on her name, the wealthy fiancé who would not let a runaway go unpunished. Every instinct screamed for caution, yet something in Ethan's steady gaze compelled her forward. Sammy Hodge appeared at the edge of the alley, his blonde hair tousled, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. At 10, he was small for his age, but the spark in his blue eyes spoke of courage beyond his years. His patched coat and worn boots had weathered the previous night's chill, and now he lingered a few paces behind, curious and watchful. He had watched Ethan care for Clara, and the boy had learned, in silence, the quiet courage of protecting someone who could not defend themselves. Clara finally nodded, swallowing her fear. "Lead the way," she said softly, voice trembling. She mounted the chestnut horse with Ethan's steady assistance, feeling the animal shift beneath her as it snorted softly in the cold morning air. Ethan followed, Clara's blanket tucked safely around her shoulders, Sammy keeping pace behind on foot, his small boots crunching over the icy crust. The forest lay ahead, tall pines rising like sentinels from the snow-covered ground. The air was crisp, the scent of pine needles sharp and invigorating. The trio moved carefully through the underbrush, Ethan in the lead, scanning constantly, ears and eyes alert. Clara clutched the reins with white-knuckled hands, heart pounding with each snap of a branch beneath the horse's hooves. Every shadow seemed to shift with intent, every gust of wind a whisper of potential danger. Hours passed in tense silence. Clara's gaze wandered to the towering trees, their branches heavy with snow, the world around her a monochrome landscape punctuated only by the red-brown of Ethan's coat and the occasional flash of Sammy's hat. She finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. I should tell you," Ethan did not look back, but the tilt of his head invited her to continue. "My family, we were wealthy. Georgia. But—" Her words faltered. Clara swallowed, struggling to steady her voice. "We lost everything. Bankruptcy, forced marriage, and there's a bounty on me. My fiancé, he wants me found." The words hung in the icy air, bitter and raw. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, the corners of his eyes narrowing not in judgment, but in recognition of the stakes. He pressed forward, guiding his horse carefully, making sure Clara's movements were steady, his presence a shield against both the elements and the unknown dangers lurking in the woods. Sammy tripped over a buried branch, snow erupting around his legs. He cried out, panic flashing across his small features. In a heartbeat, Ethan reacted, dismounting with precise speed. His hands were firm as he grabbed Sammy, steadying the boy and brushing snow from his coat. "Easy," Ethan said, voice calm, reassuring. "You're all right. Just watch your step." The rescue was quick, almost imperceptible, but its impact was profound. Clara's gaze softened at the sight. Here was someone who did not hesitate, who acted decisively to protect the vulnerable. A fragile sense of safety, a bond of trust, deepened between the three of them. The ride continued, the snow crunching under hoof and boot alike. Shadows stretched and contracted as the morning light shifted through the dense canopy. Clara felt her shoulders relax incrementally, the tension of weeks of fear easing slightly. She let herself breathe more freely, even as the forest remained unyielding and the path ahead uncertain. Then, in the distance, a clearing emerged, a faint outline of buildings, smoke rising from chimneys, a homestead nestled among the pines. The sight brought a flicker of hope to Clara's heart, but with it came hesitation. The homestead was visible, yes, but nothing guaranteed its safety. She glanced at Ethan, eyes wide with anticipation and worry. "Do you think it's safe?" she asked quietly. Ethan's gaze swept the clearing, assessing, calculating. "We'll find out soon enough," he said, a note of steel beneath the calm. His hand rested lightly on the knife at his belt, a reminder that vigilance was never optional in these woods. The trio pressed forward, the forest giving way slowly to open snowfields. Clara's horse snorted, breath fogging in the morning air. Sammy's footsteps fell in rhythm with the crunch of snow under hoof, each step echoing across the expanse. The wind tugged at Clara's blanket, whispering caution, while her mind wrestled with hope and fear in equal measure. A distant movement caught her eye, a flutter of shadow near the tree line. Her stomach knotted, yet this time the fear was tempered by confidence, by the presence of Ethan, and the lessons of the night before. She was not alone, and while danger might still linger, she had allies she could trust. The homestead grew larger in their vision, smoke from chimneys curling steadily upward, suggesting warmth, life, and respite. But the world between them and the buildings remained uncertain. Snowdrifts could conceal hazards, branches could hide sudden threats, and the visibility of the clearing could attract attention. Clara's pulse quickened with anticipation, the tension of weeks of flight coiling tightly within her. The forest opened fully onto a slope leading down to the homestead. Ethan slowed the horse, scanning every line of shadow, every movement in the brush. Sammy lagged slightly, careful to avoid a hidden ditch. Clara clutched the reins, knuckles white, breathing shallow, yet a flicker of determination sparked within her chest. They had survived the forest thus far, and the homestead, though not guaranteed safe, beckoned with the promise of sanctuary. As they approached the slope, the outline of the homestead came into clearer view, but a sudden glint of metal near a distant tree caught Ethan's eye. A subtle, shifting movement hinted that someone or something was watching them. The snowfield ahead, pristine in morning light, could conceal either refuge or threat. Clara tightened her grip on the reins, heart pounding. Would the homestead truly be safe, or were unseen dangers lying in wait? Snow still clung stubbornly to the pine branches as the morning sun stretched its pale fingers over the homestead. Clara Winthrop stepped onto the frostbitten porch, the wool blanket she had clutched for weeks now neatly folded beside her. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she breathed in deeply, tasting the sharp cold mingled with the scent of smoke and pine. The homestead was small, modest, but alive. Smoke spiraled from the chimney, curling lazily above the pitched roof, and the sounds of life-soft clucks from the hens, the low whinny of a horse, reminded her that the world outside Cedar Ridge could be kind if one dared to trust. Ethan Calloway, steady and imposing as ever, leaned against the fence post, his chestnut horse tethered nearby. His storm-gray eyes swept the yard, scanning the animals, the tree line, the distance where danger might linger. The knife at his belt gleamed faintly in the morning light, a silent warning to any who might venture too close. His coat, thick with flannel and patched from years of wear, shifted slightly in the wind, carrying the faint scent of the trail behind them. Though his expression remained calm, there was an unmistakable weight behind his gaze. He bore the responsibility of ensuring Clara's survival, and he did not take it lightly. Clara's attention shifted to the animals grazing in the small pen. A young colt, its coat a soft chestnut, nuzzled a bundle of hay while several hens scratched at the snow near the edge of the barn. She crouched beside them, hesitating for only a moment before extending her hand to the colt. Its soft nose pressed into her palm, tentative but trusting. A flicker of warmth passed through her chest. Here, amidst the quiet life of the homestead, she began to feel a semblance of purpose. Ethan approached, guiding her attention to the small kitchen at the rear of the cabin. "We'll start with something simple," he said, voice low but instructive. "Cornmeal, water, a pinch of salt. Watch how the heat works, how the dough behaves. The world out there doesn't wait for hesitation." Clara knelt beside the counter, rolling the rough dough with trembling hands. Steam rose from a nearby kettle, curling in the sunlit air, and for the first time she allowed herself a moment of calm. She could hear Ethan moving behind her, the quiet shuffle of his boots across the wooden floor, punctuated occasionally by the soft clatter of utensils. The rhythm of life here was deliberate, grounded, and strangely comforting. Outside, Sammy Hodge busied himself with the hens, gathering eggs and scattering feed. The boy's small hands were deft, careful, yet his eyes never strayed far from Clara or Ethan. At 10, he was no stranger to hardship, but here, on the homestead, he learned not just survival but empathy. Each movement he made reflected a budding understanding. To help, to observe, to act without fear. After breakfast, Ethan led Clara to the stable. "Mount," he instructed, his tone firm yet patient. Clara hesitated, nerves coiling tightly in her chest. Her hands gripped the reins as she climbed onto the colt, legs shaking. Ethan steadied the horse, guiding her posture, adjusting the blanket over her shoulders. "Balance comes from the center, Clara. Trust the horse. Trust yourself. The world outside isn't always forgiving, but you can be." The first ride was cautious. Clara's heart raced with every step, her eyes scanning the surrounding trees for threats that might not exist. Yet with each passing minute, the rhythm of the horse beneath her became familiar, predictable. She could feel her confidence building, subtle but undeniable. The snow crunched under hooves, the cold wind pressed against her cheeks, and for the first time, fear began to mingle with exhilaration. Ethan guided her through small maneuvers, turns, stops, starts. Occasionally, he demonstrated the draw and careful aim of a pistol, showing her how to protect herself if necessary. Clara listened intently, absorbing each movement, each cautionary note. The knowledge was empowering, a shield against the memories of powerlessness that had haunted her for weeks. In the yard, Sammy attempted to mimic Ethan's movements, lifting an old broom as if it were a rifle, eyes wide with concentration. Clara laughed softly at the sight, the sound warming the air around them. The boy's earnestness reminded her that teaching and learning were intertwined. Even in the harshest conditions, growth was possible. By midday, Clara had tended to the animals, assisted with chores in the kitchen, and spent hours atop the horse. Her confidence bloomed quietly, a steady undercurrent to the lessons Ethan imparted. She discovered that strength could emerge not just from muscle or skill, but from choice, the choice to engage, to trust, to act with courage. Each small victory, each successful task was a reclamation of self, a statement that she was no longer defined solely by the misfortunes of her past. Sammy, ever observant, absorbed these lessons like sunlight. He learned to anticipate needs, to act before being told, and to take responsibility for small but meaningful outcomes. His laughter and chatter interwove with Clara's own, creating a rhythm of life and learning, bridging the experiences of fear and hope. The afternoon shadows lengthened, and a soft wind swept across the homestead. From the tree line, a subtle movement caught Ethan's eye, a shadow among the pines, brief and deliberate. Clara, busy brushing the colt's mane, did not notice, yet Ethan's hand moved instinctively toward his knife. His gaze hardened slightly, alert to any potential threat. "Clara," he said quietly, voice low enough that Sammy could not hear, "stay close. Watch the boundaries. The world beyond these walls doesn't always wait." Clara froze, a chill creeping up her spine, the sudden awareness that their sanctuary might not be as secure as it seemed. The shadow flickered once more and vanished into the forest. Yet the implication remained. The homestead was safe, but only if vigilance was maintained. Evening approached, the sky painted in muted tones of gold and gray. Clara stood on the porch, the colt grazing at her feet, Sammy huddled near the door, Ethan's watchful presence just behind them. The warmth of the cabin, the simple routines, and the bond forming among the three offered a fragile comfort, yet the world beyond was not dormant. Someone or something might have seen them, observed the homestead, and the quiet peace of the day carried an edge of uncertainty. Clara's chest heaved with new strength. She had learned to ride, to cook, to care, and to defend. Yet as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the snow, a question lingered in her mind. Would the skills she acquired be enough to withstand the dangers that still prowled beyond the trees? The night deepened, the wind picking up again, carrying a faint, distant sound, footsteps perhaps, or the shuffle of something hidden in the forest. Clara hugged the blanket tighter around her shoulders, aware now that comfort was provisional. Ethan's gaze swept the yard once more, calm but vigilant. Sammy watched silently, the lessons of courage and responsibility settling firmly within him. And in that quiet tension, the homestead remained a fragile haven, waiting to be tested. From the distant tree line, a movement flitted across the snow, deliberate and watchful. Clara, sensing the disturbance, glanced at Ethan. He stiffened, hand brushing the knife at his belt. The shadow disappeared, but its presence lingered, a reminder that peace at the homestead was precarious, and that danger might come from the very people pursuing her past. The snow had begun to soften under the warm light of a late winter morning, yet the crisp air still carried the sharp scent of pine and frost. The homestead, nestled among the pines, had begun to feel like a fragile haven, warm, structured, alive. Clara Winthrop stood near the porch, brushing the colt's mane, her fingers firm and deliberate. There was strength in her posture now, an ease that had not been present when she first arrived. But beneath the calm, a shadow of unease lingered, a reminder that the past she had fled from still prowled beyond the tree line. From the forest edge, a sudden movement caught Ethan Calloway's storm-gray eyes. His hand instinctively brushed the knife at his belt. A man, tall and lean, approached with measured steps, eyes scanning for a target. Harlan Crew, a seasoned bounty hunter in his 40s, exuded a dangerous confidence. Dark hair streaked with gray framed a stern face, weathered by years of pursuit and cold nights. His coat, thick and dusted with snow, carried the scent of horses and earth. Every detail, from the glint of his belt buckle to the steady tread of his boots, marked him as someone who had spent a lifetime tracking prey, and he had been given a name to chase. Clara stiffened. Her heart surged with a mixture of fear and resolve. She glanced at Ethan, whose presence remained calm but unwavering, an unspoken promise of protection. The colt shifted under her, sensing the tension, its ears flicking toward the forest. Sammy Hodge, now 10 and already acquainted with the homestead's rhythm, crouched near the door, eyes wide, absorbing the unfolding scene. He had learned courage in silence, watching, and now he was learning the price of vigilance. Harlan's gaze landed on Clara immediately. "Winthrop," he said, voice low, but carrying the weight of command. "You're coming with me." "Your fiancé wants you found." Clara's pulse raced. Memories she had buried long ago surfaced with the mention of her past, the luxury of Georgia estates, the bitterness of betrayal, the shame and fear of being hunted. She looked to Ethan, searching for guidance, but found only a steady, unflinching gaze. In that instant she understood. The choice was hers. Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself between Clara and the hunter. "She'll decide," he said, voice calm but firm. "Not you. Not your orders." His tone carried both authority and respect, a shield that extended beyond the physical space he occupied. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. For weeks she had been fleeing, obeying others' expectations or threats. Now, she had a measure of control. Harlan's eyes narrowed, frustration flickering across his features. He had tracked Clara across frozen forests, through the winding streets of Cedar Ridge, and now, at the edge of a modest homestead, his quarry had been given permission to choose. He stepped closer, tension radiating in every line of his body, but Ethan's posture remained unyielding, the colt beneath Clara shifting slightly, ready to bolt if necessary. Clara took a deep breath, letting her resolve solidify. "I won't go with you," she said firmly. "I choose here. I choose safety. I choose this life." Harlan's expression hardened. His eyes flicked to Ethan, assessing the man as if measuring the odds of immediate violence. But before he could act, a sound, a whistle of wind across the snow reminded him that time was not in his favor. The colt stamped once, nervously, and the dog growled low in its throat. Harlan knew when he was beaten. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped back, assessing the distance between himself and the homestead. Ethan relaxed only slightly, keeping his stance protective. "Go," he said, his voice carrying the finality of decision. Harlan gave a curt nod, teeth clenched, then disappeared into the tree line, his shadow swallowed by the forest. The threat had not vanished entirely, but the immediate danger was over. For now. Clara's shoulders sagged as the tension drained from her body. She mounted the colt with shaky hands, but the steadiness in Ethan's eyes reassured her. "Thank you," she whispered, voice barely audible. Ethan simply nodded, a slight exhale signaling both relief and caution. Sammy, watching from the porch, felt a rush of admiration and awe. Courage was not a single moment of heroism. It was consistent, deliberate, protective. He had seen Ethan act, seen Clara claim agency, and understood that bravery could be quiet, patient, and deliberate. For hours afterward, the homestead was a mixture of calm and vigilance. Clara helped with chores, tending animals, and preparing meals, her confidence growing with each successful task. Ethan continued lessons in riding and defense, subtle but effective, allowing her to build skill and trust simultaneously. Sammy observed, learning each nuance, absorbing the rhythms of responsibility and protection. As night fell, the forest surrounding the homestead darkened, shadows stretching across snow and field. Clara paused, looking toward the distant tree line where Harlan had vanished. Despite the day's success, she knew that choices carried consequences. The past was not gone. It lingered in whispers, in footsteps that could reappear, in glances from those who would seek to reclaim what they thought they were owed. Ethan noticed her gaze. "The past follows," he said softly, "but you decide how it touches your present." His words hung in the frosty air, carrying reassurance but also the weight of reality. Clara nodded, letting the warmth of his confidence steady her. A sudden rustle from the edge of the forest made her jump. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to the knife at his belt. Sammy froze, eyes wide. Yet the movement was nothing more than a deer stepping cautiously into the clearing. The trio exhaled collectively, tension draining in small increments. Still, the incident reminded them that vigilance was constant, that peace, however hard won, required attention. Clara wrapped the blanket tighter around herself as the stars began to pierce the night sky. She looked at Ethan, a mixture of gratitude, trust, and cautious optimism in her eyes. He met her gaze, unflinching, steady. The day had tested them, and they had endured. But now, a choice loomed larger than any threat. The choice to continue running or to embrace the life they were building here. Clara and Ethan stood on the porch, the cold night pressing in around them, considering their options. The shadows of the forest seemed deeper, more deliberate, hinting that danger could return at any moment. Would they continue fleeing, or would they claim the homestead and attempt to build a new life together? The decision was theirs, and the consequences remained uncertain. The snow had finally melted in patches around the homestead, revealing the soft green shoots of early spring. The air was crisp and fragrant with pine and thawing earth. Clara Winthrop stepped onto the porch, sunlight glinting off the frost lingering on the roof edges, casting long, soft shadows. Her coat, once tattered and ill-fitting, had been replaced with a simple dress, clean and practical, that reflected the quiet strength she had gained over weeks of trials. Hair tied back with a ribbon, she carried herself with a confidence that seemed to glow from within. Ethan Calloway, ever vigilant, leaned against the rail of the porch. 36 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with storm-gray eyes that had seen hardship and solitude, he now seemed lighter, though no less watchful. The lines on his face hinted at years of responsibility and quiet suffering, yet there was a softness now in the curve of his jaw when he smiled at Clara. His coat was patched in places, well worn from travel, but it carried a sense of permanence, a shield for the life he was building. Sammy Hodge, now fully comfortable within the routines of the homestead, bustled around the yard, helping with chores, laughing easily at minor mishaps, and learning from both Clara and Ethan. At 10 years old, blonde hair tousled from the wind and sun, blue eyes wide and attentive, he had grown beyond the timid boy who had first observed the alley that fateful night. He was learning courage, responsibility, and the subtle strength of compassion in small actions. The homestead was alive with movement. Chickens clucked as they pecked the thawed earth. The young colt nickered softly, brushing against Clara's leg, and the old barn door creaked rhythmically in the morning breeze. Clara's hands moved deftly now, gathering eggs and tending to the animals with a calm precision, yet a sparkle of delight in her eyes. She had transformed not only in skill but in spirit, shedding the shadows of her past, and embracing the reality of her own strength. Ethan called to her from the porch, voice low but warm. "Breakfast is ready." "Come help Sammy with the table," Clara joined him, taking in the domestic serenity with a sense of awe and gratitude. She had never imagined such a simple, honest life could feel so rich. They carried plates together, her hands steady, her posture upright, and placed them on the rough-hewn table outside, the sunlight warming the wood and the three of them as they worked. As they settled, neighbors began to drift into the yard, figures familiar from the distant edges of Cedar Ridge, smiling and unthreatening. Maybelle Ortiz, a short, round woman in her late 50s with tanned skin and warm brown eyes, carried a basket of fresh herbs. Her presence was a quiet affirmation of the world outside the immediate homestead, community, goodwill, and support. She greeted Clara with a nod, offering words of welcome, and Clara felt a deep sense of belonging for the first time since leaving Georgia. The day passed in a rhythm of domestic tasks and gentle instruction. Ethan led Clara to the stable, showing her how to care for the colt and other livestock, how to ride with precision, and, subtly, how to handle a firearm for protection. Clara listened intently, absorbing every motion, every word. Her confidence grew steadily, no longer the hesitant girl fleeing from bounty hunters, but a capable young woman reclaiming her life. Sammy shadowed them, trying to mimic the movements, learning the balance between caution and courage. By afternoon, Clara and Ethan sat together under the hawthorn tree at the edge of the yard, the pale sunlight filtering through budding branches. The tree had become a symbol of growth and endurance, its gnarled limbs reaching upward despite the harshness of winter. Clara's hand rested lightly on Ethan's, and for a long moment, they simply watched the colt graze, the chickens scatter, and the small yard filled with the quiet harmony of life resuming its natural rhythm. "Do you ever think it'll feel normal?" Clara asked softly, voice almost swallowed by the wind. Ethan glanced at her, eyes steady. "Normal is whatever you make of it," he replied. "We shape it, we protect it, and we decide who we let in." Her smile was small, tentative, yet radiant, a reflection of the trust she had developed, the bond with Ethan, and the lessons learned about strength and independence. She had come to understand that her past did not define her, nor did the expectations of others. The bounty, the broken promises, the fears, they were now threads in a tapestry she could control. Sammy, kneeling nearby, observed the scene with rapt attention. He had learned more than how to ride or care for animals. He had witnessed courage in action, the patient fortitude of Ethan, and the reclamation of self by Clara. These were lessons that transcended chores and skills. They were about life, responsibility, and heart. As evening approached, the sky painted itself in muted golds and lavenders, the first stars beginning to pierce the twilight. Clara prepared a simple meal with Ethan's guidance while Sammy gathered firewood, the warm glow from the hearth spilling onto the snowy patches outside. The homestead was quiet but vibrant, a sanctuary built through perseverance, trust, and the deliberate choices of its occupants. Finally, the moment arrived. Ethan led Clara outside beneath the hawthorn tree. Its branches, stretching wide, were dusted lightly with lingering frost. They exchanged quiet, steady glances, the weight of their journey and the trials they had endured settling around them. Sammy stood nearby, watching, aware that this was a moment of significance, a lesson in courage and love. Clara inhaled deeply, sunlight and the scent of pine filling her senses. This feels right," she said, voice firm, calm, and yet quivering with emotion. Ethan nodded, his hand brushing hers with gentle certainty. The vows were simple, unadorned, yet carried the weight of weeks of struggle, trust, and newfound freedom. In the quiet of the yard, under the enduring hawthorn, they pledged their lives to one another, unbound by past fear or pursuit, anchored instead by love, courage, and choice. The stars emerged fully as the sun set, their light dancing across the snow in delicate patterns. Clara and Ethan stood together, watching Sammy tend the fire, the colt grazing nearby, and the small homestead alive with gentle sounds. The world was still imperfect, still vulnerable, yet they had carved a space where trust, love, and protection could flourish. The past remained behind them, no longer a shackle, but a testament to the resilience of the human heart. In that quiet, profound moment, the homestead was more than a place, it was a promise, a symbol of renewal, of lessons learned, and of the enduring capacity for hope. Clara smiled, truly smiled, feeling whole for the first time. Sammy looked on, eyes bright, absorbing the sight, learning once again that courage, love, and responsibility were inseparable, and that family was not just blood, but those who chose to stand together. The wind whispered through the hawthorn branches, soft and approving, as if nature itself acknowledged the completion of this chapter in their lives. And for the first time, Clara, Ethan, and Sammy felt the simple, profound peace of home, a place secured not just by walls, but by trust, love, and the courage to face the world together. As the snow finally melted and the first blooms of spring touched the homestead, Ethan, Clara, and young Sammy stood beneath the hawthorn tree, the sunlight filtering softly through its branches. Their journey had been long, filled with fear, uncertainty, and the weight of past mistakes. But in facing those trials, they discovered something timeless. Courage is not the absence of fear, and trust is not given lightly, yet both can grow from the smallest acts of kindness. Life will always test us, yet it is in choosing to protect, to care, and to believe in one another that we find our true strength. And sometimes, the ones we rescue are the very souls who rescue us in return. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share where you're watching from in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next journey of courage, hope, and heart. Your story, your place, your voice, bring it with you, and let's continue discovering the extraordinary in the everyday, together.